The perfect Halloween game has arrived on Switch. If that's got your attention, good, because Crow Country is a game that demands all of yours and more. It's a survival horror set against a backdrop of terror, disappearances, and corruption, where you take charge of Special Agent Mara Forrest as she travels to and investigates the terrifying events that have enveloped Crow Country, an abandoned theme park. Our search for its seemingly missing founder, Edward Crow, begins imminently, and as such, we must navigate through a now run-down, deserted amusement park. Deserted except for the ones referred to as guests. And by that, I don't mean pleasant folk looking for a fun time at the merry-go-round. No, sir. Here, that term is reserved for the roaming monsters, more on them later, who are occupying the now shut-down park. Though, something tells me these guests were not invited. It's not initially clear what has happened at Crow Country, but what is instantly apparent is we're about to enter a perilous world, one with surprises lurking in every corner, one where you'll need to keep your wits about you to progress, but also one expertly crafted by developer SFB Games, who showcase a tremendous amount of not just skill, but a real understanding for what makes an effective horror game experience. And to that point, whilst the developer has constructed a game which is very much its own and houses an original and highly engaging story which develops at a beautiful pace and has extremely well written dialogue and characters and an interactive playground from which their creativity breathes, they have also sprinkled Crow Country with elements of past great horror games and indeed are not shy about wearing those inspirations on their sleeves. Right from the onset, the developers have coated their game in an art style reminiscent of a time, maybe the golden period, when the PS1 and the N64 were home to such classics as Resident Evil and Silent Hill, to name but a couple. Throughout the game's 5-hour runtime, you will encounter various other nods to the aforementioned classics, especially Resident Evil. The first time you bring up the inventory menu, your nostalgia senses will tingle at the sight of the UI displaying your heart rate pulsating, as well as displaying your items in that now familiar manner. Fortunately, however, the inventory space in Crow Country is far more generous than that in Capcom's 90s classic, meaning you shouldn't run out of space anytime soon. The puzzles too throughout the game have a passing resemblance to those tackled within Raccoon City's famous mansion. Some will see you having to assemble statues in a certain order to open up a pathway, while other puzzles have you completing mini-games in an arcade to gain access to valuable items, and you'll even have to interact with a fairy in some eyebrow-raising ways. Whilst these puzzles are clear inspirations, I personally found them and the many other ones in Crow Country very enjoyable and well thought out. There are often clues laying around in the form of staff notes or diaries which will have the information needed to aid you in your quest to crack them. And whilst some will not trouble you too much, other puzzles like the ones involving the various computers you'll come across, I found more of a head scratcher, which I very much appreciated as a nice level of complexity, therefore providing a level of satisfaction in overcoming them. The time spent with puzzles or better said my heart, took as a welcome palate cleanser to the main underlying theme in Crow Country, the horror and the ever-present fear of the jump scare. So let's delve further into that aspect of the game. I don't want to call Crow Country a cute game because it isn't. Let me tell you, ain't nothing cute about some of the monsters, again we'll get into them later, that you encounter, and there certainly isn't anything cute about some of the story themes, but you might be forgiven for taking a look at the chunky characters and the overall approachable presentation of Crow Country and think it would lack the ability to get under your skin. It doesn't, and it definitely will. They do an excellent job in creating a real sense of unease. This is primarily done by keeping the player in the dark, only ever hinting as to what is actually happening. Initially, this is executed through environmental storytelling. When we first step into Crow Country and gingerly traverse through its first attraction, a once enchanting fairy tale town, we are greeted with a now desolate and grim looking place. Sprays of blood are decorating the footpaths, crows are clustered together chomping down on remains of something too ravished to distinguish, and even flammable canisters are populated around, which years of playing survival horror games tell us we're gonna have to explode those in order to take down something pretty sizable. What those sizable things might be is anyone's guess at this point, but the developer sure plays into this uncertainty. Elsewhere, the entire attraction and every other one is covered in litter with popcorn boxes and other junk. Is this merely another sign of an abandoned place or a sign of people chaotically running away from something? Our first concrete clue comes when we meet paranormal photographer Arthur Mole, who is lying on the ground severely injured, apparently by one of the monsters we'll soon be acquainted with. Sure enough, we find his Polaroid camera, but his pictures don't give us much to go on other than an out of focus shot, serving only to feed our imagination. By drip feeding information this way, the developer is reeling us in slowly, and when they are sending us from location to location, searching for clues, revisiting certain locations multiple times, they are manipulating us by lending us a temporary state of comfort for a sense of familiarity. But it is temporary and only a matter of time before it's snatched away away again and the rug is pulled from under our feet. That moment manifests itself when you are on your way to a mission, running through a corridor you've been through 9 times, only to have your heart leap out of your mouth during the 10th run when a grotesque, blood-soaked monster is waiting at the other end. From that moment on, nothing is the same, and you don't dare enter another room without your pathetic torch switched on and your gun drawn. Jump scares like these happen a fair amount in consistently inventive ways and continuously caught me out, resulting in the odd shriek escaping my mouth. You soon become skeptical of your surroundings and second guess whether you should even approach that eerie looking mechanical vampire in that coffin. The game does a wonderful job of keeping the sense of dread and tension on the surface. Not only are there a variation of scares, but a good variation of types of monsters too. You'll have run-ins with some real eyesores. Some are human-sized and will slowly approach you before lunging an attack. Other times you'll be met with what can only be described as a sliding infestation of bloody cells. These are easily dodged. What are not so easily avoided are the monsters residing on the other end of the size spectrum, such as the Colossus being awaiting you in the ocean attraction with weapon in hand. In other areas, you'll be cornered by a tall, disjointedly moving skeletal creature. Its appearance was enough for me not to hang around for pleasantries. There are even more creatures besides these, and they are introduced at different junctions in your story, but soon will overrun the place unless you take them out. Fortunately, you get the chance to equip yourself with more than the initial basic handgun you start off with. You can, for example, acquire the trusted shotgun, a devastated flamethrower, and even grenades. But don't think you can turn Rambo style and unload at will. This is a survival horror after all, and ammo can be hard to come by. One tip from me is to check the vending machines and trash cans for ammo and health. They are lifesavers. In your search for the origins of these creatures and for Edward Crowe himself, you will visit a world I think has been brilliantly designed. Each part of the park has its own character and is brought to life with great effect. Whether it's the spooky haunted hilltop suitably dressed up with candles and pumpkins, or the aquatic vibes of the Ocean Kingdom with its seabed littered with sand and sea life and even housing a full-size submarine. Every corner of Crow Country has been meticulously put together, evoking the intended emotion from the player. Everything on the surface, however, is in complete contrast with what we find in the underground, a place where we come to learn is being used for mining, but for what reason and to what end is not something I will divulge in this review. What I will say, however, is that it's a suitably terrifying place to be in, so make sure you have more than a few rounds of ammo handy. I must give special mention to the great audio design that weaves its magic through every fiber of the gameplay, pulling everything together. Rather than imposing itself, a lot of the scores blend into the background and convey a sense of anxiety, accompanying your own sense of trepidation as you feel around in the dark. In the moments that your heart rate ramps up at the sight of the latest nasty surprise jumping out at you, so does the music ramp up with purpose. And in the moments the game offers a brief sense of reprieve, such as those spent in the solitude of Crow's Lounge, the underlying music will replicate that feeling of relief and transform into a more relaxed melodic score. It's all beautifully executed and really excels in enriching the world and putting you right in the center of it. I've mentioned the dialogue in the story briefly, but I do want to expand on the excellent writing on display in Crow Country, which really comes to life in the interactions between you and the other characters you bump into. Whether it's the creature chasing Arthur Mole, lawyer Julie Barron, Crow's daughter Natalie, or even Edward Crowe himself, the conversations shared with them always have purpose, move the story along, and never overrun. I never found myself reaching for the skip button or wanting to speed through these interactions. If anything, I found them a constant delight and highlight, especially those featuring Edward Crowe himself, who will randomly interrupt your gameplay with phone calls laying out the mess he has gotten himself into, and usually end with him teasing a revelation before hanging up on you. All things considered, I deeply enjoyed my time with Crow Country. I instantly fell in love with its playful art style, and the more I delved into it, the more enamored I became with every aspect of its contents. The world is entirely filled with an infectious atmosphere which hits you to the core. The story, which I've tried very hard not to get too into here, is one that's never anything less than thoroughly engaging and concludes triumphantly. It's therefore a challenge to come up with any negatives about my experience with this gem, but if you push me, I'd point to the extended load times that occur whenever entering and exiting areas. These can be a little bothersome, but hopefully a future update could address these concerns. The combat too maybe could have been a little bit more sophisticated or had more layers to it, but then again, I'm probably nitpicking as it's perfectly serviceable as is. As mentioned before, Crow Country is inspired by the likes of Resident Evil and Silent Silent Hill, but as its own game and as an experience, I'm happy to say it deserves to sit at the same table in the company of such classics. SFB Games have created a great horror experience with so much to love, plenty of scares, and will have you thinking about your time at Crow Country Amusement Park long after you've left. I highly recommend that you add it to your library. You will not be disappointed, and that is why I am scoring it a 8.6 out of 10, and eagerly await what SFB Games have in store for us next.